One always great question. I always go to the finance team on day one when I rock up as a test manager. I say, okay, first tell me, do you spend about 1 to 2 weeks processing the previous month end? God, yes, we do. You're like an oracle.
Welcome to CTIO 101 Episode 3, sponsored by Fairmont Recruitment, hiring technology professionals across the UK and Europe.
I was born in Dallas, Texas, and you can tell from my accent that I came over when I was 7, and,
right, okay.
and a really strong, broad Texan accent in the late 70s wasn't particularly popular in the UK. My parents tell me that within 2 weeks, I sounded like Dick Van Dyke in Mary Poppins, the sort of the American version of the Cockney accent to try and survive.
I was born in Ohio, so raised a country boy, and I grew up in Kentucky. My dad was an electrician in the coal mines, and then we upsticksed one day and went to live in Florida, and he built schools down in the Fort Myers, Cape Coral area. So I started learning how to fish in the ocean and windsurf and dive off bridges into alligator infested waters.
There was a lot of that going on when we were lads.
Yeah,
there was no seatbelts.
No seatbelts.
Smoking in the car was the least of your worries. It was just some miracle.
As a kid, you used to lean out the window like a dog practically and hoping you didn't hit a tree or a push. But
we were talking on the last podcast I did about the chemistry sets you used to get that had
I had one of those.
dangerous chemicals in them. How would you describe yourself if you had to do the American elevator speech? What would you describe yourself as?
I've been 25 plus years in the testing business. I'm an advocate of data quality, and that can be in the program manager space or indeed the actual doing and getting data sorted out. So even looking at data.
You're quite passionate about data.
Yes, very passionate about data.
Where does that passion come from?
You might only do this once in your lifetime. You might only do one migration project while you're at that company. You might change from a massive legacy to a brand new shiny tool, and that might be it. You'll then retire. So you only do maybe 1 or 2 of these in your career. Unless you're a contractor and you do this punishment, you love punishment like you and I, John, and you do this all the time. But everyone says to me, we got loads of production data in the test system. 2 things. 1, that's very wrong. And 2, that data is probably 2-3 years old. And it's always a thing where the data wasn't brought over properly to the test environment. So it's always a case of having to try and find things to make it work.
I was doing some research for this, Brett, and obviously had a little bit of extra time. And being a CTIO myself, I've obviously dealt with data. It's part of the bread and butter. In fact, there's a podcast episode I'm publishing tonight, which referred to people process technology.
Okay.
And in it, I was actually saying, if we were to modify it, if we could add anything to it, what would it be? And I suggested you'd add data to the people process technology and data. It's such a massive topic, and there's so many different facets to it. One of the things we thought would be a good structure would be the challenge. And the challenge, Brett, is how do you improve your data in 90 days? You might get into the how long is a piece of string conversation, but typically in your experience, is there a realistic 90-day approach that you can reuse?
I believe there is, because the difference between master data and transactional data. So your transactional data is made up of your master data, and your master data, as long as you know where that's coming from and what systems are, you could look at that master data and just make sure it was the right quality level. Definitely.
Just remembering that we're 101, we've got a lot of people that are listening to the channel who don't have the same level of experience. We do have some folks at the same level of experience who are interested in maybe areas that's not right in their sort of professional expertise. But a lot of folks are looking at this as trying to understand business technology. So there's a really obvious point, which is, what is data? Attempt a definition, Brett. What is data?
Data comes from numerous resources. You've got metadata, which is the tagging and things like that you keep track of. And then there's the master data, which is your core setup data, your suppliers, your customers, your products, the things that change, but not all the time. And then, of course, you've got your third-party data that kind of comes into you via APIs and things like that. And indeed, data that you actually send out. There's many facets of data.
And that master data that you described, if I sort of wind back the clock for me, that's like your main entities. So I'm talking about the old school entity relationship diagrams and doing your sort of the one-to-manys and all that, many-to-many, all that stuff. In business technology, we express the business in tech. And the way we do that, we do all sorts of operations and everything, but we're always doing something with data. This might seem so obvious to you in terms of your expertise. Why should I even care about my data?
There's a number of reasons. One is because we're so more geared now to making sure our data is protected and making sure that the industry is putting the right level of protection. I just saw something on LinkedIn just earlier before I come on here about Coca-Cola potentially having a data breach. And you think, I don't buy from Coca-Cola. Well, you kind of do. And they collect marketing information about you. And is that data now compromised? So there's all these different things about data that we have to be, is it GDPR compliant, or do they have security? From a business point of view, you need to make sure that you're reporting the right data to then better steer your company ship. If you're getting the wrong information, the wrong data, oh, we got so many customers bought this. Why do we got loads stacked in the warehouse? Did we order more? No, that's the same lot. Oh, okay. Thought we sold these. Well, so the data kind of has to match to be able to give your company the right feedback.
It is blindingly obvious, isn't it, when you boil it down to those principles? But I just think people can get lost. Do you think you see organizations that describe themselves as data-driven, or certainly you get at a certain level in any organization, everyone's driven off of the MI reports, the management information reports.
Yeah.
But nobody... It's a bit like when people see something printed. If they see printed text, they have a tendency to say that must be true. And if you see a report in front of you with columns and bar charts and all the rest of it, you think, well, this is obviously true. But all of that is just coming up from the back of the data, isn't it?
Exactly that. And people sometimes don't realize what it took to actually make that. And I think that's where these things like BI and Snowflake and all these other applications come into it, where they're trying to get you the best view. But then if you don't have the right core foundation data to begin with, how can you get that view to be correct?
Let's say we've got someone listening, they've got something in front of them. I'm just trying to think of the sort of scenarios where you might get really interested in a kind of a 90-day approach. Maybe a data migration. What can I do in the next 90 days?
They need to find out what's in their data and how it's getting changed by what systems. I think that's very key. And starting from there, you can then work out, okay, I'm going to do a migration. Okay, you need to just get a data health check. Let's just look it over. Let's find out what's in it. Let's offer you some suggestions. Let's let people look at it. I think what people tend to do is they really go, oh, I'm going to use Excel. And okay, I'm only going to use 1.2 million lines, but you've got 6 million. Somebody asked me the other day, we got 1.2 billion rows. Well, look at that. I said, yeah, it doesn't matter. I don't care how long it is or wide it is. You need to know what's in it and how it works.
So scenario could be you start a new project. You've come in as maybe a new head of IT, CIO, CTO, and you've got to make that assessment in terms of, I think sometimes, I don't know what your experience is, Brett, but when you go into a new position, you don't often have a full detailed handover from your predecessor. So there's a bit of work that you need to do. And if you don't do that, if you make some assumptions, you can really set yourself off on a very poor foundation, can't you? So actually the 90-day scenario could fit quite a few different use cases. Okay, so we've rocked up. Let's say it's day 2. We've had day 1 sorting out our laptops and we've got security access and all the rest of it. How do you start when you're kind of your 90 days? Where do you get started with?
I suppose the first thing is understanding what sort of data schema they have. So they're using Oracle, Hadoop, Mongo. What sort of database structures do they have? And what I like to first know is understand the data structure and understand where that data is coming from. Is that coming from the cloud? Is it on premise? Do you have legacy systems that feed in? How does basically your operation work? Oh yeah, we buy some stuff over here, we stick it in a warehouse over there, and all these people distribute it, and then these people buy it from the shop. Okay, cool. So that kind of gives me a little bit of an indication of your architecture, what that's going to look like. And then I need to understand, excuse me, how that data is put together. So what does your data schema look like? If you do know, a lot of people don't. What's your data schema look like?
And how do you tackle that sort of slightly awkward conversation, Brett? Because if you met me and I was on day 1, I would just say to you, we don't know. But if you met me and it was year 2, 3 plus, I might be inclined to say, actually, that's a very good question, Brett. And of course I know what my schema is, but I still don't know. The data architecture, it's wrapped up in all the legacy and it's
I mean,
often overlooked, isn't it?
yeah, and the people you need to go to is your architects. So if you have a solution architect and people like that, and potentially your DevOps, they'll know your architectural, they'll know what servers connect to what. And that's what you look for. You look for an architecture diagram as a starting point,
Yeah.
then to find, okay, that's an outbound, it's going through the middleware, that's going to FIFO or Trustpilot, or that's coming from there, or it's all these different avenues that you need to just make sure you understand. Okay, that's the first thing up. You need to know where your data is
Are
located.
there any tricks or tools that are available to discover that? If the DevOps folks tell you, we understand this element, but this element over here is a bit of a mystery. I'm just trying to work out if you don't have that local knowledge, or if you're in a situation where there really isn't a lot of understanding. The systems are being used by the business, but there isn't really that understanding. Is there a way of getting around understanding that if you don't have that solution architect that you need?
Okay, where is your database? Point me to where that is. Well, we think it's this. So from there, for instance, if it's a SQL server, there'll be stored procedures that might bring data in and things like that. There might be some sort of middleware that does some processing. So I would go to the middleware people and say, do you do any database calls or pulls or pushes? And I'd be looking at that to say, yeah, we push data all the time from Trustpilot because people are reviewing this client's products and we push, okay, from Trustpilot into our database. Cool. Okay, so you could start working out. I've been in it long enough, and I suppose, and I've been dealing mostly with large ERPs, and they're bounded together by sticky tape and plasters, and then they do various different things through API middleware gateways and things. So it's just all right. Point me to the database. I'll start there, and let's go.
Okay. Where does the breadcrumb trail lead us to next?
Once we've done that, we need to start setting out a plan of what tables we're going to look at. So what I generally ask the folks is, what sort of problems are you having that you think that you have? And it's quite encouraging because a lot of the times they'll say, oh yeah, well, we got salespeople turning up and the person's no longer there. Okay, cool. So you got issues with customer addresses. Yeah, fine. And then we got suppliers that our salespeople buy from, but they shouldn't buy from that one because they're more expensive and we generally only buy from the cheaper one. Okay, yeah, cool. So you got issues with selecting the right supplier. Okay. And then other things like, yeah, we seem to have disappearing notes. So people will put notes on different supplier or customer accounts and they seem to disappear, potentially duplication. Okay. And then things like fixed assets or got fixed assets that they just seem to be like 5 of them all with the similar sort of name, but which one are they depreciating? Which one aren't they? Depending on which person's doing it, maybe. Oh, I always use this one. Oh, I always use this one. It's things like that that you need to then start finding out. Okay, are you having mailers, your marketing team saying, oh gosh, you don't have very good open rate on your emails. Why is that? Let's look at the email list. So start looking into the problems and finding out what they may know that they might not think is data related. Things, one always great question. I always go to the finance team on day one when I rock up as a test manager and I say, okay, first tell me, do you spend about 1 to 2 weeks processing the previous month end? God, yes, we do. You're like an oracle. No, it's just it happened. Why are you doing that? What are you doing? Oh, we're changing these things. Okay, you're changing the transactional data to make it fit because your master data is all wrong.
And like you say, it's happening every month because it's literally, you haven't dealt with the root cause. So
Yep.
Brett, on the data quality side, and another thing to throw in terms of those problem areas, one of the things I've experienced quite a lot is where a project or a big program has tried to capture data in a workflow sense, could be a contact center, could be in some sort of intake funnel. And the system that's asking questions, which might be with someone on the phone trying to, take information from the customer or the client, it's never perfect. And so ultimately you get to stages where there's something that the system says you must enter X, Y, Z. And it's just not possible for the agent to get that information. So they don't put in whatever that information is. They literally put in X, Y, Z so that they've just filled to get through to the next stage. And so
Yeah.
what you've got there is you've got data going in that's never ever going to be accurate because it's maybe the system is being too prescriptive. And I know we're not talking specifically about that, but I wanted to know whether you see that in your testing where you've got people who actually start to use the system, they get to a particular point and they just can't get that information from the other party. So they insert something, force through
Yeah.
the mandatory field.
So being a test manager, you're dealing with developers. If you're shifting testing left and you got your developers, the developer doesn't understand your business processes. So it really doesn't know how the data works. And generally my day two is I'll go to the team and I'll say, where'd you get these products from? Oh, I set them up. How many fields did you set up? Oh, I only had to do 5 that was required. Okay, what about the rest of the stuff? Well, it's not important to me because I'm testing it in this sort of window. Yeah. And this is the common problem. People don't understand that this data stacks and builds to form the end result, which is your finance documents. And things like, is it on a pallet? Is there a row? Is it a box? Are they sold each or are they sold in bulk? Things like that. Very simple calculation. If you say, oh yeah, a pallet's 10 quid, when in actual fact, each was 10 quid, the pallet is 5,000 quid. So
Yes.
it's
You can make some really big mistakes.
big
But it's
difference.
interesting you were
Yeah.
talking about how everyone's view of the data builds later on for ultimately, I suppose you call it the finance. The reconciliation is meant
Yeah.
to be the ultimate piece. And they don't have that understanding or mindset to look at it wider than what they've been given. So maybe I'm guessing that part of what you're doing is creating that sort of slightly wider view amongst everyone that's working on the project so that the
Yeah.
people aren't too stovepiped. The classic,
Yeah.
my bit worked, that phrase, which I've heard quite a few
That's it.
times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My bit works. I don't care about his over there.
Yeah.
And this can be actually within the dev team. So one developer is testing the particular unit of logging in. And then there's another developer who's now taking that login and sticking a profile to it and saying, oh, this person has access to these things. Even in that very simplistic thing, one developer is handing over to another developer, and you might call that an integration test or a system test and testing the login system as a whole. But then when it gets to it and they get out into the production system, they try to log in. It's like, I don't have access, or, oh my goodness, I've got too much access. You have to have that view. Like your CRM people, you might just think that, oh, I'm just going to type in whatever and answer the question. But then when you go out to your data officer who's just joined that we just said, and then they look at it and say, show me all the people that got this in that box. And there's none. What? And then they go to look at it and do the report. It says XYZ. It's like, oh, man, what's that? That's not going to help do my forecasting. And this is the thing, building that data, but shaping it to where everyone is used, because it's, well, in the strictest sense, a relational database. Now, we all know that there's copies of certain tables all over the place, but in its truest form, a relational database is store once, use multiple times.
Yes.
So,
Yeah. I think
yeah,
for folks who are listening, what Brett's referring to is it being the most efficient way of modeling your customer and orders and stock and all the relationships is logically to do it once. But because we're putting it into a computer and you've got lots of people wanting to access data at the same time, you have additional tables, don't you create for performance, which
yep,
you normally do as a sort of there's lots and lots of different ways of doing it. But I know in the work that I've done, or the experience that I've had, often your development, they will be able to create something that's logically sound,
mhm,
but then something that runs at any particular speed. That's when you're bringing in your DBAs and folks who are more in tune with maybe the wider collection of data. Would you say?
yeah. Yeah, and it's very important. I love to talk to SMEs to figure out the subject matter experts who know the data, know the subject. They know exactly that particular business process, and it makes it so much easier because they will have most of the frustrations, because usually they use the SMEs in an organization to sort out the support calls. Oh, I've got this problem with my data. Okay, let me have a look at it. You sure it's the data? You sure it's not the app? Well, normally they say, I've got this problem with the software. It won't work. Okay, what is it? And when they drill down to it, they understand that this master data is wrong. We need to correct it. And then, but what they then need to do for your year end, they have to physically go back and correct it for the whole year as well. So
Yeah.
that's another subject altogether
Yes.
that we
Yeah.
can get down.
That's quite a lot of coffee, isn't it?
The depth. Yeah, it is. going down deep.
Yeah. And okay, cool. So again, in terms of our kind of planning out our 90 days, you mentioned the subject matter experts. We always say SMEs for folks who
Yeah.
are new to that term. And that's the other, I suppose you're starting to build up a contact list of folks to go to, the
Yeah.
people that kind of, and there does seem to be a collection. I haven't found yet in my career the one oracle, the one person. And I think if that person ever did exist, they'd be too busy to speak to me in any case. But there is always there's always some detective work, isn't there?
Yeah, and that's why I like to pull all the SMEs together, which never to rarely happens within an organization. They just, that's HR, I'm sales, and that's procure to pay or purchasing. Because I don't have time to speak to them to find out what they're throwing me is correct.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah.
Okay, let's wind the clock forwards a bit. I don't know what day we're up to yet. Are we still being successful? Are we going fast enough, Brett, on this one?
Yeah, this is the thing, isn't it? I think what we really want to do is I use a tool set that's really good. Let's called iData. And iData, what it allows me to do is profile your database really quickly, so I can see what's in each table. So I can profile the database, look into the tables, and say, okay, in iData, you have 44 different profiles that you can, use. Has commas, has periods, has punctuation, has blanks, leading, trailing spaces, all those sorts of things. And then what you can do is not only look at some of the data and what it looks like, but you can look at how it's set up. So what's the unique parameters? What makes a postcode? What makes a telephone number? What makes a cost center or sales org? So you can start looking at those things and handing them to the right people to then say, oh my God, this is totally wrong, or we need to change that, we need to fix this. And this is what's throwing all of our stuff out. So that data profiling can take in a data health check. If you're doing like a two-week sort of data health check, you could spend probably a week on profiling, just making sure you got the right information in front of the right people, maybe 4 days. And then you want to spend maybe that last day looking that over and making some decisions. So when you come back in your second sort of week, you can say, right, now I have a cleansing plan. And that's what we're getting to. Now you want to correct that master data. Don't worry about the transactional. That's already happened. We'll get to that. But the main thing is to sort out your core foundation. You don't go and
Yeah.
build the walls of a house. You got to dig the footings first.
Yes.
And that's important.
Basically, let's deal with the root cause. Yeah. Rather than a Groundhog Day doing the transactional data constantly. You just very briefly, that tool that you mentioned, you said it was called iData. Is that right?
iData, yeah, by Intelligent Delivery Solutions, IDS. So, that it's a great product. It does many things. It profiles data. It compares data. It does similar records within a table. So you can compare different sets. Remember I said about suppliers, you might have 3 different sources of truth of suppliers, 3 different databases.
Yeah.
You can look at all 3 and find out which is the best one. And also as well, similar records within a table. So duplicates, things like that, or things that might be that woman changed her surname. Oh, that's the same person, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. So you got 2 records for them. So which one are you updating? Which one are you using? And then of course you got obfuscating data. Now, those who might not know, obfuscating is mask or security or whatever you want to say about data. You change that data so there's no way back. But the deal is you're using the structure of that data to create your obfuscated data, and then generating data. And then, like I said, the compare is probably your best friend, because once you got your source data, you look at it, that's wrong. You then put it into a cleanse table. I'm going to clean it. Here it is, nice and shiny. You can then compare those two. And then indeed, if you want to then transform that to either another migrated system or indeed into a new database or back in the old one, you can then look at all 3 views. But yeah, it's a great tool. Sorry.
No, it's good. It's great, because I think what's very powerful for people that are listening is it's something that's practical. It's obviously something you use very successfully and very familiar with. We might put a link in to that tool set if people are interested. Okay, on the obfuscation, just wanted to cover that off a bit, because I've always thought of it with the view of, look, we've got to work on some data. We need the structures and all the rest of it, but there's no way on earth we're going to have customers' details there in the test environment. Or the other great one is where you're trying to create a pre-production environment, or maybe not pre-prod, but some sort of performance tuning environment where you want lots of data, but you simply, just because it's a pre-production technical endeavor, it doesn't mean that people's data that is, in fact, it's actually, you need to be more secure about people's data, don't you? So
Yeah.
do you come across that as, do you think that skill set is common amongst tech teams, or is that one of the areas that your expertise is used? Or, do people really understand how to do that?
Yeah, and they don't. And here's the reason. And when you deal with something like SAP, the full version, everything, banking, everything has 800,000 tables plus. So that's a lot of tables. And even though you're not using them, what is inherent in all that is, remember we talked about our relationship. So we got a product table, we got a customer table, a supply table, a sales table. We're going to buy said product from said supplier. And the problem is, each one of those has what's called a primary key, an ID field. People don't obfuscate. When people say, I'm going to obfuscate my data, they're not. They're going to sanitize, they say, or secure, and they'll change the email, they'll change the mobile number, and they might change, I don't know, the first name or something. They don't change anything else. And the amount of people, even after GDPR, that I've seen have real live customer data in their test systems. Oh my God, it
Yeah.
doesn't even worth mention. It's not on, but the reason why they don't obfuscate is that, that's just too difficult. We tried that. What you want to offer is you want to offer a no way back. So I can't take your product purchase that you just made, Jonathan, on Amazon. I can't go into their system and take your purchase that you've just done and change your name, your first name, your postcode, and your telephone number and your email address. I can't do that because guess what? Your customer ID is the same. And I'll go look in production. Oh, there's John.
Yes.
It's John.
Yeah.
That's his name.
Yeah. And folks who are listening, this is the primary key. And I think if I remember rightly, Brett, I wasn't expecting to say this phrase this week, but the posted foreign key, I think, is in basically, you've got two tables of information. One of them is the information which you want to have as your source of truth, and then the other table requires some of that data, but it's used for another purpose. And all of these
Yep.
things work off of keys, don't they? Like your driver's license number, your national insurance number, if you're an American, your IRS number. These are keys. These are one number, put it in a system and get a lot of information. And that's what you're saying is, people think just because that's not immediately understandable by a human, but if you put
Yep.
that number into production, it is literally the key to all your data.
And that's exactly right. And being American myself, the social security number is now, and you know how everyone here asks you for a national insurance number, and you don't think anything about just plastering it and putting it out there. Well, you used to anyway. Over in America now, I've been told that, those, you only give the last 4 digits. When I was in the American Air Force, it was name, rank, and serial number, and your serial number was your social security number. So there you go. Stamped on your forehead.
So Brett, yeah. I think where we got to, where we were talking about the working out what the problems are. And then I think you were
Yep.
describing, Brett, that you're getting into the phase where we're getting into starting to cleanse the data. I think that's where we left off. Now, in terms of our kind of thought experiment of the 90 days, are we halfway through, or are we just still at the beginning? Where are we on that 90-day?
If you're sticking with the same system, we could probably do it in a shorter piece of time. But if you are moving to another system, then I think what's going to really, it's almost like you start that profiling, you start looking at the data. And then I think the B team, what they need to start doing in parallel is they need to start mapping to the new system. So if you're going to something like, I don't know, SAP to Unit 4. So if you're going to a Unit 4 ERP system, you might want to start looking at, okay, what fields do you have available that cover my processes over here, customers, suppliers, products, things like that. So you get that mapping. And then as the tech team, you now have to make your data fields fit into those. And again, it's a case of using that profile data to then look to see what's the best fit. Because like we've said, data might not necessarily be stored in the same table the whole period of time. You might have changed in the middle and it's now stored in a different table or an amalgamated table or something. So that mapping process is the critical, but you must have your data profiled, know what's in it, because please, listeners, do not get stung by the SI, the system integration partner, that says to you, it's time and materials on your statement of work. Look under the data section of the statement of work. It's time and materials, which basically means how long is a bit of string and how much money do you have in the bank? Because they'll say, here's 10 people. They're going to crawl all over your data and it's going to take 6 to 8 months to, okay, is that project going to be longer than your project? Or so you have to really understand what's in your data first, be educated about your data, go to your SI and say, we know about it and we know where the problems are. We know what we need to fix. That's kind of how I see that. And then that transformation side of things will then be the, okay, let's now take this data and make it fit into this new.
Really interesting point you said there. I think there's an old saying, it's not that old because it's to do with technology, but it's the, if you're in a canoe, don't outsource the paddles. And you just reminded me of that phrase, because if you go with the SI, and I've worked for quite a few of the big ones over the years, but if they have everything, if they have the total scope, and also you've done nothing other than, look, I just want to give all of this, it's just too hard, we'll just give it all over to these folks. There are certain elements of any technology project where you've got this, like you say, almost like an open-ended liability. And so if you hand all of that over to one party and you haven't taken the time to really own the quality of your data, then you are looking at an open-ended, you are looking potentially at something that becomes political, doesn't get fixed, probably gets worse because you've just introduced a whole new set of relationships with the new system without fixing the data. Do you see that? Because I think that's a wise, I think you're giving some really wise counsel to folks to say, don't, or if you're going to do it, really get in touch with your data quality and maybe have that separate to your SI.
Yeah. And the other thing as well, don't forget, when you start these projects, your development team, as soon as the SI is in the door, they got 10 developers on the ground developing code. And you're like, okay. And you might think, wow, that's good. They're really kicking it off, but they don't have your data. They don't know what data to use. They don't know what changes the data may have to facilitate to fit this new development. So you have no idea. They could charge you for something that, and I've seen it, John. I've seen people triple charging on some of these SIs for people that they're like, one guy's doing 3 different projects for the same day on 3 different budget sheets. So they're charging you 3 times as much. It's like, mind blowing.
It certainly is. I would just want to run a scenario past you, Bret. So I'd be interested to see if you've seen this before. So one of the things I've done where basically it was all around onboarding of employees, and we wanted to automate the process at the build. And so we needed to declare where the master data was going to be for the that conversation had never happened clearly, but we picked, no surprises, we picked the HR system, and that actually handled the onboarding process. So it's the right place to be. And then that data that was put into the HR system was then put onto, in this scenario, it was Microsoft scenario. So it was Active Directory. So the Microsoft Directory was getting its job description, all those key titles was coming across from the HR system. But before that, it was just coming randomly out of Active Directory or different areas. And I just wanted to know, when you're doing your cleansing and your analysis, do you often move the mastering from one place to another, or is it more of a case of nobody really just understands where data is mastered and you have to explain that concept? Or just trying to work out whether you've had a situation where there's been 2 HR systems and you have to move from one to the other. How common is that? And is that tricky?
So when we talk about legacy systems, when we move into the new realms of the new SAP or the unit 4s and things, it's more in a tight unit. But if we think back to the 90s when we all started this, we have legacy systems and it's all in different places. I know when I worked for a racing team, I won't name names, I worked for a racing team and they basically had 3 HR systems. It's like, you only have 5,000 employees in total or just less, but how do you keep track of which system you're updating when you put their different benefits or their deductions or P&Ds and all that? How do you know which is which? And you get that. You get systems to where people will put the documentation, the scans of your passport, your right to work, and your marriage certificate, all these different things they may need to collect for your job. And they'll store that in one system. And then all of your day-to-day stuff's in this system, and then you outsource your payroll and that's in a third system. That's great. Okay. But you need to understand where that single listener's point of truth is, because you just can't have that scenario to be successful.
Yeah, when that scenario exists, and there will be a lot of folks listening who either know it exists where they are or are blissfully unaware of it, but it's just going on around us, is you get they call it the swivel chair interface with people moving between two systems, or
Yeah.
why did we deliver all their kit to this address? They moved 2 weeks ago. On our system, this is the address we've been given. It's happening all the time, isn't it? And it's where automation is got the potential to really do us quite a bit of harm, because I suppose this isn't a great analogy, Brett, because I'm not quite sure about the data oil thing. It sounds a bit too like a marketing term for me. But if we stuck with that for a minute, it's a bit like putting petrol into a diesel engine. It doesn't work, and you end up with the wrong outcomes.
This podcast is sponsored by Fairmont Recruitment, leading the way in technology recruitment across the UK and Europe. Fairmont provide a high-quality consultative approach to recruitment, advising and tailoring a campaign to your recruitment needs. With a deep understanding of the technology sector, Fairmont can provide an overview of the market, advise on hiring best practice, and provide strategies to attract talent in an extremely competitive environment.
Yeah, that's right. Your data is also, don't forget, being updated potentially by many different people. This person might work in that system and update something, but it doesn't coincide with the system over here. Or they don't understand that this person over here changed something. When I worked at a big DIY retailer, basically they had 7 different marketing analysis applications. Funny enough, one of them would have done the whole thing, but no, we like this one from that one, this one from that one, this one from that one. So they had 7 or 8 different marketing analysis tools that kind of, even though 1 or 2 of them would do the whole thing, they still had the 7 or 8 different ones. It was like, are you mad?
Yeah.
They had 80 odd interfaces. There were a few. It's like,
Yeah.
why are you doing this to yourself?
Yeah. That certainly sounds like a lot of fun, Brett.
The architects, they got a lot to answer for, because the architects think, oh yeah, we'll use this, we'll use that, we'll bring it all together and they'll make a solution for you. And it's, will that work? And how much is that going to cost me? That's all you care about. But what you don't look at is that underlying cost. So how much is it going to cost for me to support it? How much is it going to cost me to put listeners on each box to see if there's any issues or security?
Yes.
Okay?
Yeah.
Yes. The more jumps you have, the more complex your whole thing's going to be, and it could fall down quite easily.
So where are we now, Brett, on our cleansing journey, or where are we in 90
So
days?
we profiled our data, we mapped our data, we started putting the profile stuff over, what results we found over to the SMEs, say, crawl all over that, look at that, just tell us what you want to fix. Is RD okay, or do you want road? Is United Kingdom in caps good, or do you want it? You go and sort that out. We're going to get on now with the mapping. So we're going to map your data and make sure that this field equals that field. We don't care about the cleanliness at this point. We just want to make sure the mapping's correct. And then once we have that, and we have now starting getting samples from the SMEs to actually say, this is what cleansing looks like. Cool. So then we'll do what's called a standard cleanse. We're going to move blanks and spaces and things like that. Then we're going to get it back to you, and you SMEs are going to analyze it. And then we're going to do what's called a targeted cleanse. And we're going to say, okay, now they want everything to say road. They want all these cost centers to be correct. All the postcodes, instead of being in address line 2, they want it in the postcode field. And instead of address line 1 having the full address, they want it chunked up. So then what we start to get into there is also in the new system. I say, you've got 10 customer tables, different tables over here. Let's use employees. So you got 10 different tables for an employee that make an employee. You got their name and address. You got their email contact details. You got another table with their next of kin, another table with their pension, another table with their deductions, all that sort of stuff, right? Now, in this one, new shiny system, sorry, we only got 1 table. Okay. So now that tech team has to now sort of make a round peg fit in a square hole. So they have to then map that to make that look like they want in the new world. And that requires a lot of back and forth. And I like to run workshops, mapping workshops, to where everyone gets involved. So that way we get the single point of truth now, rather than letting it drag on and take months.
If you imagine you've got a business whereby whatever exists inside that system, it only exists in the short time scale. Let's say it's 4 months. It could
Mhm.
be retail, some sort of retail sales cycle or something like that. And in the main, it's not repeat business. But where I'm coming from is if you had a legacy system that where the work inside it doesn't last for very long, do you think there's some cases or an argument to say in those cases, let's just let it run down in that system? We won't even do a migration because the complexity of the mapping and the getting the data quality and all the rest of it does that become a barrier? I'm just trying to play devil's advocate and say, Brett, has there ever been a time where you've said, you know what, it's not worth doing a migration here. You're better off just letting that run where it's at
Yeah.
because
So
do you see where I'm coming from?
no, I know exactly where you're coming from. And I've seen it many times in a mapping organization and in various other places to where you have a very old AS400 or something server that's ancient stuff. And you just think, hang on a second, it's not worth upgrading that. Okay, cool. No problem. So what we'll do is we'll take the data and get alpha there and put it somewhere else, one, or two, we're getting all this bad data from it. And something like, for instance, like the iData tool, you can have a transform rule that just runs and says, monitor that table. When that table kicks this data out, change it to this, and then put it into the new system. So you can build in little go-betweens that at least manage that. So if you found the root cause be your legacy system, not worth upgrading, okay, but it's still giving us data, but okay, it's not correct, then you can, I've had people go in and even just write standard SQL scripts that just change it.
You're giving people license to do a bit of data fettling on the basis that is the old system and it's going to run down. It's not, if you want to live with it for a long time, that's not the right approach, but it is
Of course.
acceptable to do that. And also, I just love the fact that you use the phrase AS400 and ancient in the same sentence because I used to back those up.
Me
I
too.
used to run the tape. It used to be part of my overtime gig as a young professional. I was changing the tapes. That was for a big Dutch-based consumer electronics company. There we go.
Uh,
Quite, and it was about 150 years ago.
Oh, I know.
Interesting.
I mean it in all the good sort of sense because yeah, I've had to do mainframe stuff with some high retailers who used it to process orders to third party
Well,
suppliers like Florence and
and
like that.
Brett, don't name any names, but Mainframe's still around. There are still some
Yeah, sure
big,
is. Yeah,
big
yeah.
in government, and this Mainframe is still going.
Still alive and
Yeah,
kicking.
absolutely.
And I think that's where you probably need to look as, okay, I don't think you're up to standard with your data on that side of it. You may need to look at how you sort that out. But yeah, definitely still there. I know one large retail organization in a high street that still uses it to, as I say, to do florists, to do furniture, to do all the third party, what we would class as EDI sort of stuff that you get shipped direct from the supplier rather than them holding the stock.
Yes,
Amazon's perfect example of EDI.
yes. Yeah. So EDI folks, we'll get some explanations. Brett, I've got Malcolm who speaks on the episodes. He's not real. He doesn't know he's not real, but he's just an AI. So we generate, and we're working on generating a face for him as well. But what he'll do is he explains some of the terms that we'll use. But electronic data interchange (EDI), I
Yeah.
remember working in manufacturing and having the first sort of EDI console where you effectively, it was a mapping exercise, wasn't it? It was, here's the message coming
Mhm.
from, I don't know, the chip supplier. And this is how
Yeah.
it literally relates to the products that you've got within your ERP system. And you'd map them
Mhm.
through and then you'd press a button. And then as long as the wind didn't change direction, it would work for about a week. But yeah, incredible. Incredible. You've been called in for a kind of
Yeah.
an update and it's like, okay, Brett, we brought you in. We're on the. We're trying to improve our data quality. Where have we got to so far? Are we over the biggest challenges, or are there still big challenges and risks ahead of us in terms of the process you described?
I think the main thing is then, I suppose, if we overlay what are you going to change? So, whatever the SMEs have found, how the old business processes fit with the new business processes. And let's face it, right? During a migration transformation, now is the time that if you're going to change something, let's get it changed all at once. Then minimize this disruption over the longest period of time. So, you try and just get it all done. So, I would say overlaying those new processes, is that data still going to work for you? And are there any other things that you now want to look at and to use and to work with this data? and how you want that to be shaped. Am I going to now, for instance, if you take like Experian, a great organization, they hold a lot of data, a lot of personal data, what we call PII data, which personal data. And then you just got all this stuff. And they want to make sure that they're staying GDPR compliant, but they also want to make sure it's serviceable and it's usable and it's sellable and it's up to date. So now we got to and when they change something, they overlay the new process and say, does that change anything? Do we have to make any new allowances for data rules or compliance or anything like that? So what we're up to now is we're saying we got it profiled, we got it cleansed, we know exactly what data issues we've had, we know how to fix them. What we now up to is here's a list of systems that we need to look at to as a root cause analysis that's causing us issues. And those could be third parties supplying data into you, which you don't, like you said, John, you don't necessarily, oh, yeah, I just get my data from there. I don't know. It just goes in. You may want to now put something on your side of the API that says, every time you see this data, it's going to go like that. If they're not willing to change their API, you need to then make it usable to you. So you need to look at that. So we'd be able to map those out and say, look at these sorts of things. But I think now, once we had that in place, the best part about using a tool like iData, for instance, all that stuff you built up to do the profiling, the cleansing, the transforming, guess what? It doesn't go away. Okay. The SI will go away, but this now is usable, reusable in the live system to say, right, now I want to profile my data because I had the CRM team. It just doesn't seem to know how to put data into the right field. Or I've got this legacy system still sending me stuff that I haven't had time to get to, even though Bret recommended I get it fixed. I haven't had time. So this will then say, it's like your MOT, your car. You got to get your car checked every year, okay, to be legally compliant, to be safe for you and your family, and to say to other users, same thing. Data health check will obviously let you know if my data is going astray, if it's going left or right, I can correct it. And I will have that running on an automation that will just press a button. Let's look at the data. These scripts ran overnight. Cool. And then come in the morning, run these standard cleanse scripts. And what's great about using a tool like iData is you could change that as your data changes and you never
So
get rid of it.
you're basically using it to keep on top of the investment you've just made. So
Exactly.
otherwise things just very gradually go south, or sometimes very quickly go south when
Yeah.
something else gets added and Brett's not
Right.
there to tell us off. I know I'm not saying you're telling us off, Brett, but people just with the best
Yeah.
best
Yeah.
intentions, etc.
I just don't like to see people mess up. They just put millions on to put in place, and now all of a sudden you're gonna
Yeah.
make it go south. And then what do they blame, John? First thing, it's that data. That's the problem. Yeah, it is the data. And you're trying to blame the migration team or the data team.
Yeah.
No, how you're using the system
It is a
processes.
bit like blaming oxygen
Yeah,
for not being able to breathe. There is some sort of weird truth in that, but it's not really getting to the essence of the problem. Quick
yeah.
question for you, Brett, which I wanted to ask if you'd had any experience using sampling, because when I've looked at third-party data providers, particularly folks who give addresses, obviously you're in a position with your own customers to know a customer address that maybe you've just received 10 minutes ago, and you can take a sample of the customer of the third party data to see whether the two are in sync, or to see how up to date or not up to date some of these data providers are. Because what I do is I sit down and I think anyone who's providing me with address information's got a real big task on their hands to keep it up to date with all the different changes that occur.
Mhm.
And you can't check every single address. So I've deployed some kind of sampling where you work out what your sample size should be. There is a little bit of technicality, listeners, because the problem space you're looking at has to be something called normally distributed, because that's the sample I'm referring to. There'll definitely be someone commenting on that. And so it's quite interesting that as long as you pick your sample randomly, you don't actually have to get, in the whole scheme of things, that large a sample size to then test against another data set to give yourself some confidence about the quality of data. So I don't know, Brett, if you do any sampling as almost like a maybe on the transactional data afterwards, where you say, take a
Yeah.
sample of this and let's compare it to that and see what, are we starting to get quality? Are we starting to get matches? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that's where the sampling really comes to the fore is in the transactional, because like I said, you could get to millions of rows very quickly in a transactional database. And that's where, yeah, you're right. You might want to take a sample, but if you use something like iData, it profiles 100%. It'll profile all 6 million rows.
Okay, so
And
there's no, you don't need to sample because the tool just
no,
goes.
the tool
That's
does
the
it.
absolute
And
benefit of automation.
yeah. And it is brilliant in the sense that not only does it automate and look at your data, it does every single row, every single column. And there is a bit in the new version that will allow you to actually shrink that window down and say, I only want to look at this. So if you had a table, for like instance, for all you SAP people out there listening, the new HANA table, the ACDOCA table, the ACDOCA table, which is all your purchasing and all your sales in one table. So you have 458 columns by whatever, and it's every product, every customer, every supplier, all in there in a transactional sense
Yeah.
in the one table. And it's, whoa,
Yes.
okay.
Yeah.
How am I going to look at all that?
So a
And
lot going
this,
on. Well, so, and I
yes,
think your healthy warning around SIs, one of the things that I've offered when I have been on the SI side of the table is sampling approaches. To
yep.
the really cynical SI
Excuse
person, they don't want to do
me. Mm,
sampling. They want to get someone on a desk going through everything because, Brett, you were talking about some of those practices do exist. So I think folks that
yep.
are listening, your sampling will probably appear in more than one episode. It's definitely something to get into, and we might do a sampling. I might do like a quant 101 episode because that's another area I
That
think,
sounds good.
yeah, that folks.
Because a lot of people can't, maybe they don't have the knowledge to get a tool set or to get someone in, talk to someone like you or myself, ask us questions about what do I do? Which tool set do I go for? What do I need to look at? You need a good quality data architect in to help you, not part of the SI team, but part of your team,
Yes,
because it's your data
yes.
and you need to make it sure it's being looked after and treated with the utmost respect and diligence.
Part of the
Excuse me.
paddles in the
Yeah.
canoe, 100%. Yeah, we got that. So, Brett, where have we got to? Are we almost there? Are we at coming up to 11 o'clock and it's 12 o'clock is finished, or are we still at 6:30? Where are we in our
So
process?
So now we're going to start cutting over, and I think for migration projects and things going over into new systems, there'll be some data that you can put in. You mentioned that pre-prod system, that's not yet live, but will be your live production system. So your gold client, if you like, you'll start building that up. And the sooner you can start building that up with signed off quality data, that's not going to change hugely. And what I always tell people is, once you get that data in there, like your product data, and you say, yeah, we update our catalog every 3 months. Okay, cool. So for this first 3 months, we're starting this cutover. We got 2 months left. If you do change anything, it needs to come over maybe in a delta after we go live. But now what we're going to start doing is putting that data into that system and building it. So we have less to worry about during the cutover weekend or however long your cutover period is. So you need to really kind of be in control of maybe even doing some dress rehearsals of that cutover
Yeah.
just to make sure you've got that timing.
I want to share with you one of the massive anxieties of the CIO for me is cutover. Here's a question I always ask, and I see whether you say, that's interesting, John, you're asking the wrong question. But the question I normally ask is, please tell me before we get there, where the process is effectively non-reversible. There's a sort of one of the rules I try and run engineering by is, if at all possible, don't start anything that you can't reverse out of. But there are
Yep.
the whole point of all this preparation that we've done with the analysis and the cleansing and all the rest of it is ultimately to make a commitment and to start to, cutting over. And then of course, you then start to take live transactions in the new system, and you really are beyond, you get to a point where you think we
Before you
have
know
to,
it,
that's that phrase that fills you with fear. They call it fix forward. And you think,
yeah,
okay,
that's a common SI.
but
Yeah.
what's your kind of view on that in your experience? is there a point of no return, or generally do you have a point where you could stop and reverse back?
Everything's risk-based. So your data is really going to be risk-based approach. So risk-based approach, you want all your master data in there and working and doing, because what you have to think about is when I open my doors on day one, can I take in business? Can I make payments? Can I take orders? Can I ship product? So you always have to have that mentality in mind is what can I, and you'll get this, you'll get your program manager saying, if you want this new CR change request to go through, it's going to take way too long and we can't do it. That's not day one, that's day two. You always hear that as well, the fix forward.
Yes. And also, Brett, we should point out that whenever a program manager tells you it's day two, they mean day 200.
Yeah. And that's the other thing as well. And you as a person who's employed this SI, you need to make sure that you're planning that day two and what that looks like and how long that is. So you kind of got this flow, like you say, the CIO, you got this cutover and live things happening. And then you got these questions to say, we really need that. That's business critical. Then you got your program manager saying, what change?
Brett, another question for you or observations. You were talking about you've got to go and check the basics. Can you operate the business? Quite a few years ago, I was involved in a retail implementation. I arrived almost like to do a QA a few weeks before go live. And so it's in retail. I don't know actually now whether retail still uses batch operations. I suppose you might do if you got mainframe. But one of the observations I made very quickly was that the batch window took 3 days. And this is retail. I was thinking, I'm pretty certain you can't, the client doesn't want to open their business every 4 days. I'm pretty certain they need to finish on the evening and they probably need to do stuff in that evening as well to do with stock and moving around. But it's something as basic as that, Brett. If you've got teams that aren't connected, they might say, well, we mentioned that the batch window takes X, Y, Z days. Those are the sorts of things, aren't they? You've got to, maybe the non-technical folks listening to this, trying to understand, maybe they've got something like this in front of them. They're trying to think, what are the killer questions I can ask the team just to try and get some comfort? But you definitely want to go around, don't you? All of will I be able to, the system finish everything it needs to do within our business clock, as it were?
Yeah. And you have to really, and that's why the dress rehearsal is so key, John. You have to get your cutover manager to work with your data migration team, work with your systems team. And even if you have to practice on what will be your production system and get it rebuilt. So these questions as well, you need to ask early on to say, when it comes time to cutover, can I take this production system, build it up to a certain point, and then have to say, blow it away and now start over again with the real thing.
Yeah.
Some people spin up another AWS environment nowadays and, use it for just testing the cutover and then tear it down when they don't need it anymore. So it's a throwaway.
I was going to say, Brett, as well. I'm glad you said tear it down, because that's one of the obvious places you look for as a new, in your CIO 100-day plan, is to look for all those things that have been set up in the cloud that are just still sat there, but nobody's doing.
Yeah.
It's incredible. There must be a fair bit of compute, don't you think, going on right now that isn't really computing, would you say?
And that's right. So I know I mentioned about profiling your data, you see blanks and multiple spaces and things like that. You can save probably up to 30% of your data space on your storage system. And also, what you also want to look at is, when am I actually using this system? Well, I'm only using it from 8 in the morning till 5 in the evening. Okay. And then there may be some things happening. If it's a test environment, probably not. So shut them down overnight, shut them down over the weekend. Spin them back up in the morning.
Yes.
It's all automated.
That was one of the it was one of the early sort of use cases, wasn't it, with infrastructure as code, that you could rip out everything and then press the button in the morning and the thing would build. That's quite a few.
Jenkins job. Jenkins, old Mr. Jenkins.
And that's actually old hat now, isn't it? I remember when I first saw it, I was like, I was absolutely blown away. I thought, this is incredible. But
that's and they build their data and they build their server. And then what we have, us data people have what we call the seed data. That's the data that you will then overlay every single time on every single new environment.
Got it.
Doesn't change because that's your core data set.
Got it. Okay. Have we pressed the cutover button? I know we're doing a 90-day health check, data health check, but we've now moved into this big data migration. I'm actually getting nervous just thinking about it, which I think, remember folks, fear is a sign of intelligence. So yeah, I'm getting worried, but are we going to be successful with this cutover?
Yeah, I think not, maybe not in 90 days, but close. But I think for cutover, when you want to cut that data over, it's like anything. You don't want to update your production system. So whether you're just doing a cleansing activity and a data cleaning and data assurance on your system, your current system, you're not moving. So there is that issue to where you want to keep that going, and you want to put that data now into the production system. And there are ways to actually do that to make sure you don't, overwrite anything and things like that. But it's a little bit more technical than this call. But I think from a cutover point of view, if you're now cutting, the one thing you want to do is you want to take your timings, your track timings through your data migrations, through your transformations of your data. You want to time all of those and keep those really close. Give those to your cutover manager, and then also time how long it takes to get these environments in place. So then you take it to the CTO or the CIO and say, here's what we found. This is how long it's going to take. These are the people we're going to need. And this is the running order that's going to happen in. And once you have all of that, you can then start playing out in real time. We're going to shut the users off on Friday afternoon. No more users. We're going to take the data backups. We're going to start bringing everything, down, and then we're going to start spinning it back up on the other side. And you're right, there is that point of no return, and you'll get to that usually on a Saturday afternoon or Saturday midday and say, right, are we on track? Are we on target? Does everything look pretty good? Thumbs up, go, no go. If it's a no go, you got a day and a half to spin it all back to normal or reapply the backup. If it's a go, you then just start doing everything and moving that forward and tracking. I think tracking is the main thing, tracking all the issues you're getting, logging all those. And then, like you said, unfortunately, there is always the fix forward element, but only on the less riskier things or the less you run your month end. You'll do this at the first of the month after the previous month end. So you got a whole month to make sure that you've
Yes.
got everything fixed,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
That's what we call the hypercare. Then you enter into hypercare once you're spun up and ready.
Yes. I once
And that,
separated a network of a pretty big one. Two big organizations had joined, and then they wanted to unjoin. And we basically did like a cutover every night for 6 weeks, and we had to do it in the evening. We were lucky it wasn't a 24-hour global, it was just in the UK. And we finished it, but on the fix on fail, there was a satellite office in Europe, and
Mhm.
they couldn't connect. And I got the phone call, and I said, how many people are there in the office? He says, there's 4 of them. I went, okay, if we could fix forward that one, that's not a problem. And the reason why is that nobody told us. Nobody seemed to know that they had an office of 4 people. So that I thought was an acceptable element. Okay, so Brett, we've got to the point where we've cut over. We've done this great work. I think this is really be an interesting episode, wouldn't it, to have a quick listen to, if you are looking at migration, what
Yeah.
what we've been talking about, the kind of the
Mm,
worries and the professionalism and the points you've really got to own, the points you can give to the
mm.
SI. I would also say that as CIO, I always like to get the sense that there's really good comms going on between all the different groups. That's such a key.
Yeah.
If you feel like someone's not been talked to, that's when you think, oh, goodness me, this is going to go. This could be, you're rolling the dice now. We're in the space of chance. Do you get that, Brett? You get that sort of comms
Yeah.
feeling?
Do not become complacent with, yes, we can do that. Yep, no problem. That's no problem. Prove it to me, show me, please. So always seek assurance. If you're not sure, it's your butt on the line, it's your money. Always seek assurance when dealing with SIs, service integration partners, and things like that. Always get that assurance and that backup. And if you're not, put someone there who will actually go after that assurance.
I mean,
Show me the
one of the
evidence.
things you could do, Brett, is a practical thing for anyone listening, is they could have a listen to this. And I'm sure, Brett, if you want to, they can reach out to you if you want to give your
Yep.
contact details, that sort of thing. But if they had a
Yep.
listen to this is the sort of thing to listen to, take some notes, and then have that call with the SI and say, talk me through your approach. And if it's all a bit, if they don't hit on, because we're doing 101, aren't we? We're covering off the sort of the
Yeah.
must do. We're not even getting into, I think you mentioned there's a couple of areas where it just goes really technical. We're not getting near that because that's not what 101's about. But I think that's key, because otherwise the person that's selling to you in the SI might not get it. And you got that terrible situation where someone sells something that they don't understand to someone who buys it who didn't understand either. That's not a great
Mm.
start, is it?
I had that with a car manufacturer in the UK, large car manufacturer, and they were sold a system by a big, huge SI partner based in the UK as well. And they really didn't understand this HR system fully. And they really didn't know, okay, so what do you want? We want to do this and that. They really didn't know how to articulate it, because the business people know the business and the technical people don't know the business, and they're kind of trying to learn. So you always got that battle. And me as test manager always fitted that sort of mediator. Well, hang on a minute. What are you doing? No, that's not what they want. That's not what they said. And you always got to keep checking. You always have to have that conversation and that knowledge and that experience to say, hang on a minute. You're trying to statement where it says time and materials. What does that mean?
Yes.
Oh yeah. If we come across something, we'll throw one or two people at it to sort it out. It won't take long.
Yeah. Yeah.
9 months later, you get this massive bill of 10 people, 9 months for your data migration.
I hadn't really thought of it in the way until you just said it then, but you're really obvious when you do have the two tribes, the really obvious people that sort of integrate between the two, your business analysts back and forth, and you've got your senior managers in technology are doing their best to represent the business, etc. But testing is that it's a moment of truth, isn't it? So you absolutely have to be the bridge between, and also you get the feedback really quickly because this is at the end of the development. It's either working or it doesn't. So it's interesting. You must have in your testing profession quite the mix of skills, including business engagement as well as technical. And I suppose testing can throw up a problem in any part of the system. Yeah. Because if you're good at testing, you should find problems all over the place. So you've got to have knowledge of the whole stack. And also it's even better if you've done it in a particular industry, some sort of things that are common in a particular setting, that sort of thing.
But yeah, you got to know a lot of things about, well, a lot of things really, because you need to know a BA to know what a requirement is testable or not. You need to know about non-functional requirements and whether they're testable or not and how to test them. You need to know about all the different testing elements, performance, automation, all those sorts of things. And you need to understand people. You need to have good comms. And I suppose the other thing, one of the most important ones, you need to ask the right bloody questions, right? You need to know the right questions to ask and especially if you're hired by the client and not the service integration partner, system integration partner, you're not hired by the SI, you're hired by the client. You're in a great place because now you can start being the devil's advocate and being the voice and being the lawyer who's standing in the dock saying, hang on a second, that's not quite true. I always static test the statement of work. I like to know who's on the hook for what. And I like to have that clearly outlined, beat that drum continually until eventually I've had one of the biggest SI clients tried to get me removed from a customer's site because I was stating the obvious and they were trying to pull the wool over their eyes.
That's a badge of honor. You should take that as a badge of honor as long as you're representing the customer's best interests. Yeah, it'd be really interesting. And also you mentioned all those elements, Brett, that you need to understand.
Yeah.
And you didn't say data because that was pretty obvious. We're talking about data.
Sorry.
No, I know, but I'm just saying you've got all of that and data, which I'm hoping everyone listening to the podcast or watching will know that in itself, it's just such a big topic. And I did a bit of research and I'll put some notes in on the blog, etc. But I had a look at a couple of data only podcasts and I was like, can you really do a whole podcast, a whole channel dedicated to data? Crikey, you can't you, Brett? And I was driving back from Isle of Wight. I did 5 hours of data podcasts. And I can say, I will put a link in, and I think the podcasts I found are great, but I do think you can have too much of a good thing in one car trip. So I think next time I might just have a few more elements in my playlist. But it's a massive topic, isn't it?
It is. And a lot of people who I work with continually and things. Don't get him started on data. You never shut him up.
Brett, that doesn't happen at the pub, does it? This isn't don't get Brett started on his second pint. He'll be talking about his iData tool until you bought a copy of it.
I tell you, I absolutely love the tool and I love what it can do and help people. And I think my passion lies in I don't like to see people taken advantage of. I work with too many clients, with too many SI partners, and this, come on, you guys got to get savvy. If you're going to do a project like this, you really need to understand your data. You really need to understand that, because
Yes.
they are going to charge you time and materials, and it's going to
I
go
think
for
that's a
ages.
big recommendation coming out of our conversation is you've got to understand it. You've got to own it.
You got to
You
own your data, you got
don't
to understand it.
outsource
Yeah.
your data, and get someone you really trust who's got a track record
Oh.
and get your head into it.
You can do it, John. It's so easy. They can do it. If they had a tool like iData, it could really be done very simply. Even if you did get the SI to do it, they can be trained, they can be taught, and they can, at least you would have the visual assurance very quickly of what that data looks like without having to scroll through rows and rows of, data that you think might be wrong, but you don't know. What am I looking for? It's like a needle in a haystack. Whereas a tool like that just
Yeah,
boom, does it. There you
that
go.
was that.
Here's your report.
That's that point. There was a great answer that you gave to my sampling challenge, which was actually you don't need to, John, because it just does everything. I was like, oh,
I did the whole
fine,
thing.
fair enough. We'll have one of those then. Yeah, no, nice one. Nice one. Okay, then, Brett.
You need to get into your data. You need to understand it, even if you're CEO and you just have a basic sort of view. But you need to make sure there are people in your organization who are owning it, who are keeping you compliant, who are keeping you. Think back to the Enron days and Lehman Brothers and all those people didn't have a clue the data was going south. And you need to own that, because you are responsible for that as the CIO or the CEO. So you need to own that. You need to be responsible, or at least have an idea where it's going. But also as well, making sure your data science team or your data analysts who are giving you this forecasting and planning information is correct.
Brett,
Yeah,
I
exactly.
just want to say, absolute pleasure speaking to you. And I really appreciate
Yeah.
it, because you've only had one coughing moment, which was much appreciated. And is there anything coming up in the Brett calendar that you'd want listeners to know about?
We got James Briers and I are doing a thing for Enbridge. We're doing a questions about data quality coming up on Friday. So I'll send you a link to that. That would be a great listen, because James, who's the CTO of IDS and iData, he set out originally with the tool set to actually compare test systems, the data sets in those test systems. And that's how the product evolved. So James got a lot of knowledge as well. Got the scars, same as you and I, John. If anyone has any questions, feel free, and you'll have my details on that. Feel free to ask me. I'm quite happy to help out. I do try, and if you got some data you want me to have a look at, a POC, just to see what's in it, very small, we can do that. Not a long, drawn out process, just maybe an hour or two. I can
I
help
think,
you see what's wrong
yeah.
with data.
And what folks should take away from that, a proof of concept with someone as experienced as Brett looking over it, and the topic that we've just covered and all the different areas, there were lots of rabbit holes we didn't go into that we could have done. Getting that kind of QA view at the beginning can save you a lot of time
A lot of
and
money.
a lot of heartache. Yeah, and a huge amount of money. Yeah, absolutely, Brett.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
Brett,
It's best to be prepared. I've got a load of questions. Maybe I'll fire over to you, John, that you should be asking yourself in the pre and the during this data journey. And the pre ones are really good, and it's loaded with the pre, because the more pre questions that you ask and you get answers to, the better prepared you are for the actual delivery. And you'll be surprised.
yeah.
Some of the questions you might think, that's not really relevant. Trust me, it's relevant.
Yeah, and it's a universal operations principle, which is if you deal with things early on, it's a lot cheaper than dealing with them later on. And you get as much as you can up front and understood, and get experience around you, like folks like Brett.
You might only do this once in your lifetime. You might only do one migration project while you're at that company. You might change from a massive legacy to a brand new shiny tool, and that might be it. You'll then retire. So you only do maybe one or two of these in your career, unless you're a contractor and you do this punishment. You love punishment, like you and I, John, and you do this all the time.
It's a really good point. That's a part of the 101, is that there are things that come along to a company which is just the once. I think so. The average age of some of these systems is sort of 10 years. So time to change every 10 years. And and I'm sure you've seen legacy systems way older than 10 years. I have, and they're still up and running.
Yeah.
See, the computer doesn't know how old it is. That's the thing. It just carries on. As long as there's electricity coming in, it's happy. Brilliant. So Brett, it's just a huge thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
That's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for listening to episode 3, sponsored by Fairmont Recruitment. hiring technology professionals across the UK and Europe. My name is Malcom and I am AI generated. I wanted to tell you about something humorous with regards to something Bret said in this episode.
So I started learning how to fish in the ocean and windsurf and dive off bridges into alligator-infested waters.
Before I was compiled, I was often left in fast storage without regular backups. That's living dangerously. Tune in next week for more CTIO 101. Business technology, simplified and shared.